The Galactic Summit was the most important event in the universe. Every year, different species from across the stars gathered to discuss politics, trade, science, and cultural differences. This time, the summit was held on the planet Velar, home to the Velians, a proud and intelligent alien race. Among the attendees was David Carter, a human ambassador representing Earth. He had been to many summits before, but this one felt different. The Valethians were known for their advanced society, strict traditions, and strong belief in biological superiority. They were tall, elegant beings with golden skin and deep blue eyes. Unlike humans, their species followed a strict reproductive cycle, mating only once every few years when their bodies allowed it. At the center of the summit stood Princess Asura, the future queen of the Valethians. She was young, confident, and highly respected among her people. She believed that her race had the most perfect biological system in the galaxy. To her, every species was bound by nature's rules. Just like her own, the discussion had been peaceful until the topic of reproduction came up. Asura, sitting on her throne, looked around the room and addressed the delegates. Every species has a natural cycle. It is nature's way of maintaining balance. No species can reproduce any time they wish. The body must be ready. The mind must be prepared. This is true for all living beings. The room was silent. For a moment, some species nodded in agreement. Others remained quiet. David raised an eyebrow and exchanged glances with his team. He wasn't sure if Asura was making a general statement or if she truly didn't know about humans. He decided to speak up. That is not entirely true, Your Highness, David said with a polite smile. Humans do not have a restricted cycle. We can reproduce any time, in any season, at any moment. The room suddenly became tense. Several alien delegates turned their heads toward him. The Valethian nobles whispered among themselves. Asa leaned forward, her blue eyes sharp with curiosity. You are mistaken, she said firmly. No species can do that. Biology does not allow it. David chuckled lightly. With all due respect, Your Highness, humans can. Asura narrowed her eyes. Prove it. David was taken aback. He hadn't expected such a direct challenge. Prove it, he repeated. Yes, Asura said, crossing her arms. I will not believe words alone. If humans truly have no restriction, then you must show evidence. David hesitated. He looked around at his fellow diplomats. They were just as surprised as he was. How could they possibly demonstrate something like this in a diplomatic setting? One of the human scientists, Dr. Melissa Grant, stepped forward. Your Highness, human biology is well documented. We have medical data, historical records, and scientific proof. As Sarah remained unimpressed, documents mean nothing. I wish to witness it firsthand. The humans exchanged nervous glances. This was getting complicated. How could they explain this in a way that the Valians would understand? David cleared his throat. What exactly do you mean by witness, Your Highness? Asura smirked. I mean exactly what I said. If humans are truly unbound by nature, then there must be a way to observe this ability in action. The tension in the room grew thicker. The other delegates whispered among themselves. Some of them seemed amused, while others looked uncomfortable. David sighed and rubbed his temples. He had dealt with many alien cultures before, but this was new territory. He needed to be careful with his response. With all due respect, Your Highness, reproduction is not something that can be demonstrated in a diplomatic setting. However, I assure you that human biology is real. If you allow us, we can present scientific data that proves our claim. Asa tilted her head, considering his words. I am willing to listen, but I warn you, Ambassador, if you cannot convince me, I will assume you are exaggerating. David nodded. Understood. As the meeting continued, the humans began preparing their presentation. They needed to find a way to prove humanity's unique ability in a way that the Valians would accept. It was not just about biology anymore. It was about honor, science, and humanity's place in the galaxy. Little did they know this challenge would change everything. The challenge had been set the moment Princess Asura questioned humanity's ability to reproduce year-round. The atmosphere in the Grand Hall of the Galactic Summit changed. Some delegates whispered among themselves, intrigued by the debate. Others simply watched, curious to see how the humans would respond. Ambassador David Carter sat in his chair, deep in thought. The princess wanted proof, but how could they provide it in a way that made sense to the Vithians? Their species only reproduce during specific cycles, dictated by nature too. Them the idea of a species choosing when to reproduce seemed impossible beside. Him Dr. Melissa Grant, a leading human biologist, adjusted her data pad we can. Present scientific data, historical records, and medical research, but I don't. Think she'll accept numbers alone, David sighed. Yeah, she seems like the type who needs to see it to believe it. Meanwhile, Princess Asura leaned back on her throne. Observing the humans, she found their confidence, amusing. Every species had biological limits. How could humans be any different? Finally, David stood up and faced the princess. Your Highness, we accept your challenge, but before we proceed, I need to understand what kind of proof would satisfy you. Asura's eyes gleamed with interest. Something undeniable, something that cannot be questioned. David exchanged glances with his team. He could already tell this was going to be difficult. Very well, he said. We will prepare our evidence. The humans' strategy. Later that evening, David and his team gathered in the human embassy on Velar. They needed to prove their claim, but they had to be careful about how they approached it. She won't accept medical charts or research papers, Dr. Grant said, tapping on her tablet. She wants direct proof. Then we show her history, David suggested. We have centuries of records proving human reproduction isn't bound to cycles. One of the younger scientists, Dr. Ryan Lee, nodded. We could also show her real-time data from human colonies across different planets, birth rates, conception statistics, all of it. David agreed. And if that's not enough, we can bring in real human families as living proof. The team worked through the night gathering evidence. They accessed historical records of human civilizations showing how their species thrived in different environments: deserts, frozen tundras, deep underground, and even space stations. They collected real-time data from human settlements across the stars, proving that births occurred every day in every season under every condition. By the time morning arrived, they were ready. The presentation, the grand hall was packed. Delegates from various alien species had returned, eager to witness the outcome of the challenge. Had humans been telling the truth? Princess Asura sat at the front, her golden robes shimmering under the bright lights. She looked calm but curious. David and his team stood before the crowd, a large holographic screen activated behind them, displaying data. Dr. Grant stepped forward. Your Highness, we present to you the truth of human biology. The first image appeared, a timeline of human history, showing continuous growth in population. Unlike Valithians, humans do not wait for specific cycles. This has allowed us to expand across the galaxy at an incredible rate. Next, the screen displayed live footage from human colonies. People from different planets appeared, some living on frozen worlds, others in desert environments, some even on space stations. Each scene showed families with children of different ages. These families prove our claim, Dr. Grant continued. In every part of the galaxy, humans reproduce without restrictions. No matter the environment, no matter the season. As Sarah leaned forward, studying the data, she had never seen anything like this before. And to further confirm this, David added, we have brought living proof. A door opened, and a group of human families entered the hall. Mothers, fathers, children, and even newborn Bobbies. The audience murmured in surprise. The Valians had never witnessed such diversity in reproduction before. Asura's expression remained unreadable. She stood up and walked toward one of the human families. A young woman held a baby in her arms, smiling politely at the princess. This child, Asura asked, was born recently. The woman nodded. Yes, Your Highness, only 2 weeks ago. Asura turned to another couple. And your child 5 months ago. She continued, asking different families, and each time the answer was the same: humans had no fixed reproductive cycle. Finally, she turned back to David, her expression serious. I admit this is unexpected. David smiled slightly. Does this prove our claim, Your Highness? Asura was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. It proves that your species is truly unlike any other. The hall erupted into whispers. The challenge had been met, and the truth was undeniable. But for Asura, this was only the beginning. Princess Asura sat in silence, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the human ambassador, David Carter. The evidence was undeniable. She had seen the data, the real-time footage from human colonies, and had even spoken to human families herself. yet something deep. Inside her refused to fully accept it. The Valians had always believed that nature dictated reproduction cycles for a reason their species could only conceive during certain years when their bodies were biologically prepared. It ensured stability, control, and balance in their society, but humans had no such limitations. They had broken free from nature's rules. This is strange, as Sarah finally said, choosing her words carefully. If your species has no biological restriction, how do you control your population? How do you prevent chaos? David exchanged glances with his team before responding. We have science, Your Highness. Medicine, technology, and education allow us to manage our numbers. Unlike the Valythians, we don't rely on nature to decide. When we reproduce, we decide for ourselves. A murmur spread through the crowd of alien delegates. Some seemed impressed, others looked doubtful. Asura folded her arms. You claim to control your own evolution. Dr. Melissa Grant, the human biologist, stepped forward. In a way, yes, humans have developed methods to choose when and how they reproduce. This freedom allows us to adapt to any environment. It's the reason we have spread across the galaxy so quickly. As Sarah frowned, this is dangerous. If every member of my species could reproduce any time, our cities would become overcrowded, resources would run out, chaos would spread. David nodded. That's why education is important. Humans don't just reproduce because they can. We make choices based on our circumstances. Asura remained skeptical. Even if I believe your data, I still do not understand why would nature allow such an ability. The debate continues. The room remained tense. As the discussion continued, other alien delegates joined in, some agreeing with the humans, others siding with Asura. A representative from a reptilian species, the Drenthar, spoke up. Perhaps humans are simply an exception, an unnatural mistake. David smiled slightly. Or perhaps we represent the next stage of evolution, one where a species is not limited by nature's rules. As Sarah tilted her head, considering his words, the idea unsettled her. If humans could ignore nature's restrictions, what else might they be capable of? If what you say is true, Asura said, then I must witness this adaptability myself. David raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Asura stood from her throne, her golden robes shimmering under the lights. I will visit a human colony. I want to see this ability in action, not just through data. If your species is truly unrestricted, then I must understand how you maintain balance. The room fell silent. No Valythian royal had ever traveled to a human settlement before. David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Very well, Your Highness, we will arrange a visit. Asura smirked. Good, let us see if humans truly deserve their reputation as the most adaptable species in the galaxy. As she walked out of the hall, the other delegates whispered among themselves. For the first time, the Valythian princess would step into a human world, and what she discovered there would change everything. The decision had been made. Princess Ashura would visit a human colony. The Valythians, known for their strict traditions and belief in biological cycles, had never sent a royal figure to live among another species. This was not just a political visit. It was a test. Asura wanted to see for herself how humans lived without nature's restrictions. As the arrangements were made, tensions grew. Some Valythian nobles believed Asura was wasting her time. Others thought she was risking too much by leaving Velar, but Asura was determined she could not allow humans to challenge everything she knew without investigating further. Preparing for the journey, Ambassador David Carter and his team worked quickly to select a suitable human colony for Asura's visit. The chosen location was New Terra, a thriving settlement on a distant planet with a mix of environments, forests, oceans, and vast cities. It was one of humanity's best examples of adaptability. New Terra is a perfect choice. Dr. Melissa Grant explained it has people from all backgrounds, different climates, and a diverse range of families. The princess will see how humans manage reproduction, growth, and society firsthand. As Sarah listened, but remained skeptical. Very well, I will see for myself if your claims are true. The Valian royal guards tried to persuade her to reconsider. Your Highness, no Valythian ruler has ever lived among humans. What if their ways are dangerous? What if they are reckless? Asura shook her head. That is exactly why I must go. If humans have broken free from nature's limits, then we must understand how. Arrival on Nutra. The moment Asura stepped onto Nutra, she was overwhelmed. She had traveled to many planets before, but this was different, unlike the carefully controlled environments of Velar. New Terra was alive in a way she had never seen. The cities were vast and filled with people, young, old, families with children, scientists, explorers, and merchants. She saw humans of different ages, everywhere: bobbies, teenagers, adults, and elders. There was no strict cycle, no pattern. Life simply happened. David guided her through the streets, pointing out schools, hospitals, research centers, and markets. This is how we maintain balance, he said. Humans don't just rely on biology, we build systems to support our choices. Asa watched as a young mother carried her newborn while talking to an elderly man, likely her father. Nearby, another couple walked with their children, laughing. As they played, there was no sign of chaos, only harmony. Despite the lack of restrictions, your people are unpredictable, Acer admitted. Yet everything functions. David smiled. That's because we take responsibility for our choices. Adaptability is not just about surviving, it's about creating solutions. Asura's doubts, despite what she saw, Asura struggled to accept it. She still believed in nature's control. What happens when too many children are born? She asked, what if families cannot care for them? Dr. Grant answered, that's why we have education and healthcare. We ensure that children are provided for, and families plan their lives based on their abilities. Sarah frowned. So you decide your own future? David nodded. Yes, we don't let nature control us, we control it. As Sarah remained silent, she had spent her whole life believing that evolution followed a strict pattern. Now, standing among humans, she questioned everything. A new perspective. As the days passed, Asura observed more of human life. She visited schools where children learned about the universe. She met doctors who ensured safe births. She spoke with scientists studying ways to improve human life. She even met families who had adopted children, something unheard of in Valian culture. You raise children who are not biologically yours, she asked the human woman. The woman smiled. Family is not just about biology, it's about love and responsibility. Asura was speechless. For the first time, she realized that humanity's strength was not just in their ability to reproduce year-round. Their true power came from choice. They had found a way to live beyond nature's restrictions, not through recklessness, but through understanding, and that thought terrified her. The turning point on her final night on Nutra, Asura stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing city. David joined her. So, Your Highness, he asked, have we proven our claim? Asura didn't respond immediately. She looked up at the stars, thinking of her own people, still bound by cycles, still following the path nature had given them. Finally, she turned to David. You have shown me something I never imagined, but I do not know if my people are ready for this truth. David's expression softened. Change takes time, but understanding is the first step. Sarah sighed. Perhaps she had come to New Terra to prove humans wrong. Instead, she had found a truth she was not ready to accept. The question now was, what would she do with it? Princess Asura had always believed that nature's rules were absolute, yet after days on Nutra, she could no longer deny what she had seen. Humans had freedom, not just the ability to reproduce year-round, but the power to control their future. Still, the thought troubled her. Could her own people, the Valithians, ever live this way? As she prepared to return home, she found herself walking alone through the streets of Nutra. She had dismissed her guards for the evening, needing time to think. The city was alive, even at night. Families ate together in small restaurants, children played in the parks, and workers finished their shifts. Hospitals, research labs, and factories, everywhere she looked, life continued without waiting for nature's permission. As Sira sat on a stone bench watching a human father with his child, the little girl, no older than 5, asked him endless questions about the stars above them. Why do they shine? Because they are like the sun far away. Can we go there one day? Maybe. The girl giggled, and Asura's heart tightened. The father had not told his child what was impossible. He had told her what was possible. Her people had never thought this way. Valithians accepted what nature allowed. Humans asked what else was possible. She closed her eyes. What if everything she believed was wrong? The final conversation. Later that night, Asura met with Ambassador David Carter. For one last discussion before her departure, David leaned back in his chair. So what did you think of Nudera Asura? Hesitated. I do not have the words, David. Smiled, that's a rare thing for a Princess Asura. Ignored the joke, your species does not wait for nature. You shape your own path. You create families. In ways that my people would not understand, and yet it works. David nodded. Yes, but I understand why it might be hard to accept. Asura looked out the window at the glowing city. If my people learned this truth, it could change everything, our traditions, our beliefs. They are built around cycles, around the idea that nature chooses for us. If I bring this knowledge home, it could cause instability. David studied her carefully. Then what will you do? Asura sighed. I do not know. For the first time in her life, she did not have an answer. An unexpected visitor, just as their conversation ended. A human woman entered the room. Dr. Melissa Grant looked slightly nervous as she carried a small data pad. Your Highness, I need to show you something. As Sarah frowned, but gestured for her to continue. Dr. Grant pressed a button and a holographic image appeared, a medical scan of a Valian female. Asura's eyes narrowed. What is this? Dr. Grant took a deep breath. It's from one of your own people, a Valithian scientist who has been living on New Terra for years. She recently had a child. Sarah's heart stopped. That is impossible. Valians could only conceive during specific cycles. There was no way a Valian could have a child outside of those conditions unless... David leaned forward, suddenly serious. We double-checked the data. She conceived here on Nutra, outside of the natural cycle. Asura's hands trembled as she stared at the scan. If this was true, then it meant Valethians were not as restricted as they had always believed. Her people were not bound by nature. They had simply never tried to break free. The truth she could not ignore, as Sarah felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Her entire civilization had structured its society around the idea that reproduction was limited to cycles. But what if that was never true? Why didn't she report this? She asked her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Grant hesitated. She was afraid if the Velian government found out, she could be seen as unnatural. Asura closed her eyes. She had always believed that humans were simply different, an exception to the laws of biology. But now she had proof that her own people might be capable of more than they had ever imagined. The truth was terrifying. If she brought this knowledge back to Velar, everything would change. Some would embrace it, others would fight against it, and Asura would be at the center of it all. She looked at David and Dr. Grant, her voice firm. Send me everything, every piece of research, every scan, every detail. David raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Asura stood tall. If my people have been living a lie, then they deserve the truth. For centuries, the Valithians had followed the path that nature had set for them, but now Princess Asura had a choice. Would she let her people remain in ignorance, or would she become the one to change everything? Princess Asura sat in silence inside the spaceship, staring at the glowing screen in front of her. The data did not lie. A Valithian woman had conceived outside of the natural cycle on human soil. It was a truth that could shake the foundation of her people's beliefs. She had always been told that their species followed strict biological cycles, that nature dictated when new life could be created, that trying to change it would be unnatural and dangerous. But here in her hands was proof that everything she had believed might have been wrong. The journey home. The ship hummed softly as it soared through space, heading back to Velvar. Acer's royal guard stood silently, unaware of the storm of thoughts inside her mind. Ambassador David Carter had handed her all the research before she left Nutra. He had said only one thing before she boarded: truth is a powerful thing, Your Highness, but not everyone is ready for it. Asura understood his meaning now. Her people were not ready for this. If the Valithians learned that their reproduction cycles were not a biological law, but a limit they had placed on themselves, what would happen? Would they accept it, or would they reject it and fight to preserve the old ways? She let out a slow breath. She was not ready for this either. The council meeting, as soon as arrived on Velar, she was summoned to the High Council. The nobles and scientists had been waiting for her report. The great hall was silent. As she stepped forward, dozens of Valithian leaders stared at her, expecting answers. Princess Ashura, the High Elder, spoke, his voice calm but firm. You have lived among the humans. Tell us Are their claims true? Asura's mind raced. She had two choices she could lie tell. Them that humans were simply different, and that the Valians should not concern themselves with such matters, or she could tell the truth. She took a deep breath and raised her head. The humans are not bound by cycles, she said. They reproduce freely, and yet their society is stable. They manage their growth through education and responsibility. A low murmur spread through the council. Some looked shocked, others skeptical. The High Elder narrowed his eyes. And do you believe this is a superior way? As Sarah hesitated, what did she believe? She thought of the human family she had seen, the adopted children, the freedom to choose one's future, and then she thought of the Valethian scientist who had conceived on New Terra outside of the natural cycle. Esra's hands tightened. She could not keep this secret. I have seen something more, she continued. A Valian, one of our own, has conceived outside of the cycle while living on. Nutra. The room exploded with gas and hushed whispers. Some council members stood up in shock. Others looked at each other in disbelief. Impossible. One of the elders shouted, lies, the humans must have altered her body. Another accused. Asura shook her head. The data is real. I have seen it myself. Our people are not as restricted as we once believed. The High Elder's face remained unreadable. If